Thank you very much. We're ready.
Okay. Welcome, welcome, everyone. We are here again for our 5th iteration of the African American Speaker Series themed The Power to Define. This Power to Define speaker series, for those who've missed out or those who need a reminder and or for both, the speaker series promotes insights relevant to the psychosocial historical context of the extant African American. Insights have focused already on history and systems, self and racial identity, prejudice and racism, health and mental health. And here tonight, we are here to listen to Dr. HAKIM RASHID, to focus on socialization dynamics in the family. This Power to Define speaker series is spirited to suggest that we, as African Americans, have the power to define our own existence and not be relegated to somebody else's definition. Dr. HAKIM RASHID is incredible. Let me just say that. We are very fortunate, lucky, and blessed for him to be here tonight to share with us his knowledge, his expertise, and his wisdom throughout his years of being such a leader in the field, such a mentor to many. A quick bio read: Dr. RASHID is a full professor and former chairperson of the Department of Human Development and Psychoeducational Studies in the School of Education of Howard University, Washington, D.C. He's a native of Flint, Michigan, and he received his bachelor's degree from Pomona College in Claremont, California, his master's degree and interdisciplinary Ph.D. in education and psychology, both from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Dr. RASHID is a traveled scholar, as he has served as a Fulbright scholar at King Saud University in Saudi Arabia, a visiting professor at Khartoum University in Sudan, and a Fulbright Hayes Seminar Abroad Fellow in China. Oh my goodness, he has lectured in Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates, South Africa, Bermuda, Canada, and of course, the United States. Honorable mention, he is the executive producer of a documentary called Strange Fruit Redo. And he is well published in several journals such as, just for example, the Journal of Negro Education, the American Journal of Islamic Social Sciences, and more. Dr. RASHID has mentored several individuals. When I posted the flyer and distributed, I received multiple messages that I know Dr. RASHID, that's my man, from the 90s and from the 2000s, etc. I know Dr. RASHID, I remember him, he helped me out. Well, I tell you, Dr. RASHID helped me out as well. I've known him for ashamedly over 20 years by now, and I still call him mentor. And I've graduated to his space for me to be able to call him friend, but I don't call him Hakeem. I call him Dr. RASHID no matter what he tells me. So we are here today. I'm going to give the reins, pass the baton to Dr. RASHID. Dr. RASHID will provide a presentation, and then we will open up for questions and comment in the chat section. Dr. RASHID.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Coleman. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. And I almost feel like Bowie State is kind of a second home. I live right up the street in Lanham, and I've got a number of students, former students and colleagues out there on the faculty, and hope to see some of them, if not today, then soon. I'm going to try to share my screen with you guys, and bear with me because I am somewhat tech challenged. Let's see here. We did real good with our
run through, huh?
Yeah, with our run through. Here we go. We're getting there, right?
Yes, yes.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about family dynamics and socialization in the African American community. There's a lot of ways that we could have gone with this kind of discussion, but I want to start out with just some basic definitions. And we won't dwell on these definitions, but we just want to make sure we're on the same page. You look at that first sentence. What is socialization? The social processes through which new members of society develop awareness of social norms and values and help them achieve a distinct sense of self. Now here, this is a pretty standard sociological definition of socialization. And it's one that you'll see in the sociology literature, the social psychology literature. How do people become part of the society that they live in? All right. Now, as we talk more specifically about particularly socialization within the African-American community, we have to talk about racial and ethnic socialization. And here the American Psychological Association has broken it down to RES, racial and ethnic socialization. And he talked about it including the direct, explicit messages children receive about the existence of racism and the meaning of race, as well as related indirect or implicit messages. Especially for young children, parents and family members are the primary source of racial and ethnic socialization. So we can't really talk about African-American socialization without talking about racial and ethnic socialization. That's part of what it means to be Black and in America. And we also have to talk about political socialization. And here, political socialization is defined as a particular type of political learning whereby people develop the attitudes, values, beliefs, opinions, and behaviors that are conducive to becoming good citizens in their country. And again, I'll make sure that Dr. Coleman has this PowerPoint presentation if you want to come back and review some of these definitions. In terms of positive, I think I want to go back here. I want to go back to some examples of positive racial and ethnic socialization. Here we can see Thurgood Marshall, Angela Davis, John Conyers, and I would encourage you to go back and take a look at their life histories. Take a look at the family influences in terms of their racial and political socialization. And what you'll find is that their ethnic identity was nurtured very early on. So to me, these are three examples of positive racial and political socialization. Now, on the other hand, I almost consider these folks to be toxic in terms of their racial and political socialization. We can look at Clarence Thomas, we can look at Ben Carson, we can look at Condoleezza Rice, and I would encourage you again to take a look at their life histories, take a look at the factors that went into their racial and political socialization. These are people that, for the most part, have done very little to advance the cause of the African-American community. And I think in many cases, at least a couple of cases, they will make excuses why African-Americans are in the situation that we're in. Now, when we talk about messages communicated, and again, we can talk about these examples, but the whole notion of what kinds of messages are communicated by parents about race, communicated to children. And again, this is from the American Psychological Association. I should note that the APA is not the same organization in terms of putting out this kind of information that it was over 50 years ago when a group of Black PhD level psychologists split off from the APA to form the Association of Black Psychologists. So they say that research on racial socialization is primarily focused on the following types of messages: messages emphasizing pride in being Black, warnings about racial inequalities, messages that de-emphasize the importance of race, sometimes called a colorblind approach, and instead may emphasize that hard work will ensure someone can overcome racism, a mistrust of other racial or other ethnic groups, and silence about race and racial issues. So what you'll see is that many of us coming out of the African-American experiences, we were given one or more of these kinds of messages. You'll find many of us talk about this so-called colorblind approach, the de-emphasis on the importance of race, while others we've received constant messages about how important it is and how prideful it is to be African Americans. Now, one of the things that I'd like to do is take a minute to do a personal kind of reflection on early socialization, my own early socialization, and I want to focus on four things: family engagement, teachers in the early years, positive role models, and Ebony Jet. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. In terms of family engagement, my early socialization was being one of those folks whose family engaged in a lot of discourse about being Black, a lot of focus on pride in being Black, talking about the history of our family, talking about the kinds of struggles that people had to go through. And as a young child, I'm sitting around the dinner table, sitting around family gatherings, soaking all of this in. So when my mother talked about having to leave Flint, Michigan to go to St. Louis because none of the nursing schools in Flint would accept her, that was a powerful message for me. Is that do what you have to do to get the credentials that you need. When my father talked about being in the automobile factory, and even though he was a card-carrying member of the United Auto Workers, he still had nuts and bolts thrown at him when he began to work in a job that wasn't cleaning toilets, in the factory. My teachers in the early years, 3 of my first 5 teachers in elementary school were Black. 2 of them lived in my neighborhood. My kindergarten teacher, my first grade teacher, and my 5th grade teacher, who I read just recently passed away. We're seeing research now about the importance of Black teachers for Black children, and how important it is if a person has 2 straight good teachers in the elementary years, they are almost guaranteed success. So these people were powerful for me. After 5th grade, I never had another full-time African-American teacher until my senior year in high school, when I had a Black French teacher, and he made such an impact on me that when I graduated from high school, I wanted to major in French and be an interpreter for the United Nations. Now, this was during the time of the war in Vietnam, so ultimately, I didn't like that idea of working for the United States government too much, and that's when I switched to psychology. Positive role models, just having people around that were doing positive things. In my neighborhood, again, with housing segregation, you might live in a neighborhood that had all kinds of people. So behind me was a dentist. Across the street from him was the owner of the local funeral parlor. Right down the street was the one Black policeman that was on the Flint police department. And I mentioned the teachers that lived in the neighborhood. Okay, so again, these were people that served as positive role models. And finally, Ebony and Jet. Some of you may have, grown up with Ebony and Jet. Unfortunately, Johnson Publications went bankrupt, and I think the Black community has to take some responsibilities for that. But many of us grew up with Ebony and Jet, and this is how we learned about Black history and Black culture and what was going on in the Black community. If you take a look at these covers from Jet magazine, you see the one from the far left one, Society's New Debs, but up at the far right corner, we see Will Baum's Keep Integration Out of Alabama. This is from 1958. They're talking about the post-Brown versus Board of Education struggle. This is pre-March on Washington, pre-civil rights legislation. We look at the one in the middle from 1965. We see Mary Wells and the Beatles. Mary Wells, one of our legendary Motown singers, and the Beatles not being bashful about acknowledging the impact that Black music had on them. And then in the top right, we see Georgia's new Negro legislators. You know, this is when people were beginning to run for state legislative positions. And finally, that right-hand thing with the cover from 1964, picture of Adam Clayton Powell, who was an icon in the African-American community, talking about his new strategy in the rights battle. He was front and center in that struggle for civil rights. So again, when you had Jet on your mother and father's living room table, and you could pick it up and you could read it and you could see what was going on in the African-American community, and Jet was something that came out every week. And then there was Ebony. You know, we see on the left side a picture of Shirley Chisholm, who ran for president, and I believe it was 1968 or 72, it's so far back now, but she was the first Black woman in Congress. And you see again, up at the top right, you know, someone talking about writing about an African safari, an article called TV Discovers the Black Man. So again, this is from 1969. We go back and we see a cover from 1953. You know, up at the far right, should dope be legalized? So they're beginning to ask questions about the whole issue of the legalization of narcotics. An article, Hollywood's best Negro movie. So again, we're looking at these. The one on the far right from 1953 again, up at the top right corner is the Garden of Eden in Africa, asking those kinds of questions. 2 years later, I believe it was, or maybe 1 year later, 1954, on the cover of Jet, we saw the picture of Emmett Till after he was murdered. You know, again, something that's seared into the consciousness of Black America. Now, one of the editors, it's one of the senior editors for Ebony magazine, was a man by the name of Lerone Bennett. And in 1962, he wrote a book called Before the Mayflower, A History of Black America. And I can remember finding this book on my parents' nightstand, probably when I was 14, 15 years old, just beginning high school and beginning to kind of flip through it. Many of the articles, the chapters in there, he had written versions of them for Ebony over the years. So if you read over the years, you were going to learn a lot about Black history. And let's just take a look at this quote from Before the Mayflower, again, 1962. And Lerone Bennett says, quote, "Civilization started in the great river valleys of Africa and Asia, in the Fertile Crescent, in the Near East, and along the narrow ribbon of the Nile in Africa. In the Nile Valley, that beginning was an African as well as an Asian achievement. Blacks, or people who would be considered Blacks today, were among the first people to use tools, paint pictures, plant seeds, and worship gods. So again, I say in the top of this slide, before Afrocentricity, there was before the Mayflower. So again, if you were steeped in Ebony, if you were steeped in what Lerone Bennett was saying, then when Molefi Asante and Maulana Karinga and people came along with the whole notion of Afrocentricity, African-centered education, it was no surprise. They really weren't bringing us a new message. What I'd like to do now is share. I don't want to share that just yet. I want to do a clip from the documentary that I made on young Black boys in early education, because it talks about many of the issues related to parent involvement. Now, let's see if we can get this here. Now, my challenge is always as other parents, but research also tells us that some African-American parents do a better job of helping. You guys can't see that, can you?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, you actually see. Okay, here we go.
Their children negotiate the educational system than others. You know, there are inherent biases sometimes that are built into the systems, especially as it pertains to the young Black boys. And they don't always see those immediately. And so it's educating them about how to address those biases, but also being an advocate for your child when they confront these situations, being able to step in and make sure that you challenge the system to make sure that they're educating your children properly and not based on whatever their preconceived notions of what they expect of you.
Because I believe that the more you stay involved and engaged, the better off for your child. And my son really appreciated me being at the school physically alive and participating.
Every school year, whether it's in the same school or in a new school environment, sit down with my kids' educators, from the teachers and counselors to the principals and vice principals, to make sure that they know who I am, who my child is, and what the expectations are for my children's education and success. I try to build a partnership with the school and make sure that they know that they can contact me at any point if there are any issues that need to be addressed, but also to let them know that I expect that my child is going to get a quality education, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that happens.
One of the big things you have to teach our kids is to take ownership of their mistakes, especially when they're young. I try to teach my sons to admit when they're wrong. They'll come home and say, it's the teacher. And I'm like, no, it's not the teacher. You're not following the homework assignments, or you're not applying yourself and doing the homework assignments. So it's always a reason behind failure, just like it's always a reason behind success. So I try to always instill in my kids to make them understand that if you don't put forth the effort, you're not going to get a good grade. And the teacher's not there to keep you from getting a good grade. They're actually there to help you get a good grade, but you should be following the lead that they're giving you, but you're not. So when you come home telling me it's the teacher, that's the worst thing that I want.
My advice would be to parents to help your kids navigate from kindergarten, particularly the third grade, is to be involved. Come to their school as much as possible. Be involved in PTA. Be that parent that comes and sit in the class. Watch the kids read. Ensure your kids are reading. Ensure the other kids are having an opportunity to read also. Ensure they're reading on grade level. Don't let them be in the third grade reading kindergarten book. If they are reading kindergarten book, ensure that they get extra work. You know, it's surprising because I told, and also I'm a high school coach, and I told a good friend, I told him that we will invest our last dollar in dollars we don't have in athletics. But we won't invest in a tutor at a young age. And if that's what it takes to get a kid from third to the fourth grade at above or at least at par at reading level, then that's what needs to happen.
All of my Black friends were raised with the same message, the talk given to us when we became old enough to be mistaken for a nail ready to be hammered to the ground, when people made our melanin synonymous with something to be feared. But what does it do to a child to grow up knowing that you cannot simply be a child, that the whims of adolescence are too dangerous for your breath, that you cannot simply be curious, that you are not afforded the luxury of making a mistake, that someone's implicit bias might be the reason you don't wake up in the morning. But this cannot be what defines us, because we had parents who raised us to understand that our bodies weren't meant for the backside of a bullet, but for flying kites and jumping rope and laughing until our stomachs burst. We had teachers who taught us how to raise our hands in class and not just to signal surrender, and that the only thing we should give up is the idea that we aren't worthy of this world. So when we say that Black lives matter, it's not because others don't. It's simply because we must affirm that we are worthy of existing without fear, when so many things tell us we are not. I want to live in a world where my son will not be presumed guilty the moment he is born, where a toy in his hand isn't mistaken for anything other than a toy. And I refuse to accept that we can't build this world into something new, some place where a child's name doesn't have to be written on a t-shirt or a tombstone, where the value of someone's life isn't determined by anything other than the fact that they had lungs. A place where every single one of us can breathe.
Growing body of research on the importance of parents providing their young children with a knowledge of African and African-American history and culture as a vehicle for promoting positive self-esteem and resilience. This can be done via exposure to literature, field trips, and day-to-day conversation. An American Psychological Association task force on resilience and strength in Black children and adolescents noted that positive racial identity contributes to the strength and resilience of African-American children and adolescents in several ways. Families, peers, and community systems embedded in Afrocentric cultural values and beliefs provide socialization experiences that enrich identity. A positive sense of ethnic self provides a buffer for individuals from racism and discrimination. Positive racial identity is associated with positive global self-esteem, which serves as a protective factor.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and continue with the presentation. The PowerPoint here. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. So we see then that we have these vehicles for promoting this whole notion of racial and ethnic identity, positive racial ethnic identity. It's because our knowledge of our own history and culture has been taken away from us, and it's something that we have to consciously try to reestablish. We need to understand African-American families need a deep reservoir of cultural knowledge. First of all, we have to know that African-American history did not begin with slavery, and that's why books like Before the Mayflower are so important, where our children are not going to learn this information in the American public schools, that Africa is the birthplace of civilization and that European culture is rooted in African civilization. If you've not read the book Stolen Legacy by George James, make sure you read it. Make sure you understand that Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle didn't bring the world anything new. They only brought the world what Africans had already taught them. We run the risk of a kind of cultural amnesia and identity crisis. Without this foundational knowledge, only a sense of cultural inferiority can result as prevailing myths continue to be perpetuated. And again, these prevailing myths are perpetuated through the agency of the American public school system. And this is why one of the things that African-American parents have to understand is that the school system was not set up to educate their children. The school system does what it has been designed to do, and that's perpetuate America's class system from one generation to the next. We have to talk about the mediation of negative messages that African-American children and adolescents, again, this is from that same task force, who learn that others have negative perspectives on African-Americans, but who have these messages mediated by parents, peers, and other important adults are less likely to have negative outcomes and more likely to be resilient in adverse conditions. So the messaging there is critical. We have to make sure that our families and our children understand the importance of spirituality. Atheism is not a African phenomena. Atheism is not something that was born out of the African-American experience. Whatever we might call God, Allah, Yahweh, we have recognized historically that there is a force greater than ourselves. And this quote from Forged in the Fiery Furnace, African-American spirituality, I think, is critical. African-American spirituality is born of the pride and the pain, the horror and the hope of a people whose eyes have always been watching God and whose hands stayed firm on the plow as they fought their way to freedom. There are some critical themes that, again, this task force identified, and I got them listed here. Critical mindedness. We have to begin to look at the world in a critical way. We can't accept, whether it be the media, whether it be the educational system, we have to look critically at everything we're engaged with. An active engagement. We have to be involved in our children's lives. We can't abandon them to the public educational system. We have to be flexible. We can't say, yes, charter schools are good, no charter schools are bad. We have to investigate what the options are for our children. And finally, we have to be a communal people. We have to recognize that communalism is part of our heritage, is part of our culture, is part of our history, that we are a people that function best in communal environments. And I'd like to kind of close the formal part of the presentation with talking about what I see as some of the primary tasks of African-American parents vis-a-vis their children. First of all, to ensure physical survival. We still have a situation where the African-American death rate in terms of our infant mortality rate is still high. Our babies are dying at a higher rate. Our mothers are dying in childbirth at a higher rate. We have to promote our children's emotional security. When in those years prior to the time they're going to preschool, we have to make sure that they are securely attached to their primary caregivers. We have to enhance school readiness. We have to make sure that our children are ready to go to school, whether that be at age 3, 4, 5, that they know what they need to do, what they need to have in order to be successful. We have to provide them with academic support. Again, we can't leave them to the system to educate them. And this is whether they're in predominantly African-American or predominantly white schools. We have to promote that sense of cultural awareness and identity development that we've talked about before, and provide that sense of realistic political socialization. It's not enough to just say, go out and vote. We have to understand the entire political system and how the political system came to be what it is and where we fit, and understand that politics, all politics at some level, is local. And we have to stimulate a culture-based sense of moral and spiritual development for our children. We have to provide them with a sense of right and wrong that is rooted in our cultural orientation. So with that, I want to say thank you, and we will move on to the Q&A.
Dr. Rashid, as I implied before we started, you brought the fire tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Please, everyone who is in the Zoom, and I believe Mrs. Wedderburn can see any comments coming from the YouTube live stream. If you have any questions, if you can load them in the chat, and I will read them to Dr. Rashid and see if we can field his thoughts. But in the meantime, in between time, until I see a couple of questions come up, Dr. Rashid, what is your opinion about the schooling? What is your opinion about the school's role in socializing our children?
Well, the school is going to have a role in socializing our children. The question is it going to be a positive or negative role? And a lot of that has to do with how much we mediate what the message of the school is. We can't abandon our children. We need to look for the best possible educational options for our children, but they won't even be the same. They might, even within families, we may be choosing different options for different children. But one of the things that we have to do as parents is monitor what's going on with our children. Mm-hmm. We saw the brother in the film say, you've got to understand, you've got to make sure that the teachers know your name. They need to know you. They need to know that you are so-and-so's parent and that you're going to be involved in every aspect of their lives.
Yes.
In terms of the racial socialization piece, we have to take that responsibility. We can't just assume that the school is going to provide them with what they need to know in terms of their cultural identity.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Rashid. I have a question from a doctoral student, Stephen Thorne. He starts off with a big thank you and exclamation mark. In light of your comments about parents, please provide some strategies to engage parents to be co-partners. I lost it because it scrolled down on me. To be co-partners in the education of our children. How do we get engaged parents to be co-partners?
Well, again, I think a big challenge is to educate parents about the nature of the educational system. I was, working with an after-school program in DC a number of years ago. And one of the things that I set up for the parents of this after-school program was a series of talks in terms of what African-American parents need to know about the educational system. How do teachers form their expectations for our children, for example? What kinds of things can we do to augment our children's education? So the early childhood field, I think, has done a better job of promoting parental involvement, but I think that we have to make that distinction between parent involvement and parent education. The educational system as it stands right now, it's hegemonic, it's Eurocentric. We have to make sure that parents understand it. What are the implications of that? The mythology, the myths that are perpetuated within the educational system. I'm going to hold up a book here that I think that everybody, who has kids in school or near school, Lies My Teacher Told Me. Some of us may have come to this a little too late, but the system is replete with lies. Some of them are obvious, like Columbus discovering America. But many of us, and I'm not even sure this is covered in this book, many of us don't know, we're very proud when we hear that there were 5,000 Black soldiers that fought for the American Revolution, fought with George Washington. And that's a source of pride that the first Black man to die, the first man to die in the American Revolution, we all know his name, Crispus Attucks.
Yes.
And he's a source of pride. But we're not taught that there were 20,000 Black soldiers that fought for the British.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's some cognitive dissonance there, you know, and we have to ask, once we find out, we have to ask ourselves, well, why? Why were there 4 times as many Black soldiers, you know, Black American soldiers fighting for the British than there were for the Americans? And the reason is simple. The British were promising freedom.
Yes.
The British were promising freedom. And that throws a whole different light on our pride in those who fought for Washington and Jefferson and all of the slaveholders. You know, I mean, you know, again, I was looking at some of those old Ebony articles and stuff. In 1954, Lerone Bennett wrote an article in Ebony about Thomas Jefferson's Black grandchildren. Okay, 1954. Now, when did we learn? When did the public become aware of that? You know, and even then it was resisted. You know, it was probably the 90s, and then finally, you know, the Jefferson heirs acknowledged that, yeah, he did have a relationship with Sally Hemings. Well, yeah, he sure did. You know, but that was known again within many people in the Black community for years. You know, so I think I may have gotten away from the question, but
no, you got what you got too is some good knowledge. That's for sure. I have another question from another doctoral student. We call him Brother Clyde Dowdy. Dr. Rashid, what connection do you see with racial socialization and social justice?
Well, I think racial socialization has to come before you advocate for social justice. If you are not properly racially socialized, you won't even know what social justice is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's almost like a cause and effect. You know, when we go back into the 60s, the era that I grew up in, you know, that racial socialization predated our involvement in the civil rights movement. You know, I would not have gone to demonstrate in Flint, Michigan for an open housing law in 1967 when I was 17 years old, had I not had the racial socialization that I had, you know, from the time I was born in 1950 up until that point. You know, I would not have been actively involved in the Black Student Union, you know, demanding more Black studies programs, demanding more Black faculty, you know, had I not had the kind of racial socialization that I had. And I knew people that didn't. You know, we would have Black Student Union meetings, you know, and I'm at a predominantly white institution, and out of the, you know, it was only 300 of us on campus, but we would only have about 30 people at the Black Student Union meeting. Mm-hmm. You know, we had people that just refused to get involved. You know, but again, that's nothing new. We had people that thought that Martin Luther King was a radical. You know, people in Montgomery, Alabama, that opposed the bus boycott. But again, nothing new. All of the great slave rebellions, you know, most of them were betrayed by other slaves. You know, what did Harriet Tubman say? I could have freed a lot more slaves if they had just known they were slaves. You know, so it's this, you know, this sense of social justice. If you look at any of the great social justice advocates throughout our history, you know, they have had a positive sense of ethnic identity and racial socialization instilled in them from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. You keep bringing the fire, sir. You keep bringing it. I got another question for you.
Alrighty.
Our doctoral student, Robert Johnson. You talked about meaningful teacher education. What does that look like? And does that mean we need to include more cultural relevant curriculum or completely change the school to work prison pipeline?
Well, you know, first of all, we have to be realistic. We are not going to transform the teacher education process here in America because it's part of the system. You know, we have a predominantly white female teaching force. that's not likely to change anytime soon. Most of them being taught in predominantly white institutions by predominantly white teacher educators who have been educated just like they were. So we have to keep, our pedal to the metal, so to speak, or metal to the pedal. Don't know how that goes. But at any rate, those of us that are in HBCs, we have to do what we can to produce ethnically conscious teachers, and hopefully they can go out there and make a difference. But at the same time, and keep pressure on these traditional teacher education institutions, whether it be through the professional organizations and conferences,
Yes,
whatever we can do. But we're not going to see any whole scale transformation in that system, because the system does what it's supposed to do. I hope that answered that.
yeah, I think so. Thank you. I have a question from another doctoral student, Stephanie McLeod. What would you say are major factors that contribute to toxic racial and political socialization?
Well, it's almost like I'm not going to say it's necessarily a chicken and an egg kind of situation, but typically I think that whole notion of toxic racial socialization is a generational phenomena. We can go back. I mean, I can certainly go back to the 60s and look at people that my parents knew who were engaged, I think now, in toxic racial socialization, because they didn't really tell their children anything about what it was like to be Black. It was like, let's just all be people. Why can't we all get along? And you had that element, but that element again has always been with us. So I think that the best that we can do is try to make sure that our teachers are trying to teach our young children something about their history and culture, and teach the parents something about how important it is that the children know something about history and culture, that there is in fact a link between positive ethnic identity and academic achievement, even. So we just have, to make sure our organizations, our professional organizations, our sororities, fraternities, our religious institutions, that they are all providing a positive message in terms of racial socialization. One of those examples that I put up there, Condoleezza Rice.
Yes.
Well, Condoleezza Rice is from Birmingham, Alabama. And so is Angela Davis.
Yes.
And so you look at the two outcomes and go back and look at their life histories, and you say, oh, well, Condoleezza Rice talks about how her father was a Republican. Well, that's okay. My grandfather was a Republican. And most Black people were Republicans up until Franklin D. Roosevelt began to give Black people jobs in his first term. So by 1936, just about every Black person had become a Democrat, but obviously not Condoleezza Rice's father. And I say that because, okay, again, you're in Birmingham, Alabama. She knew one of the little girls that got killed in the Birmingham church bombing in 1963. And so did Angela Davis, but Angela Davis talks about a whole different kind of racial socialization. John Conyers, talks about a different kind of racial socialization,
Yes.
And certainly Thurgood Marshall, we contrast that with someone like Clarence Thomas. Again, both Supreme Court judges, justices, but we can't point to anything at all that Clarence Thomas has done to benefit the African-American community. I challenge, maybe somebody can tell me something that he's done that's positive. You know, here he is, a beneficiary of affirmative action, you know, when he went to Holy Cross, and I think he went to Yale, you know, and, you know, again, many people fought hard for his right to go there, but then he opposes affirmative action when it's time for him to you know, take a stand, you know. So again, anyway.
No, I appreciate that. You are pouring some knowledge oil on us tonight. That's for sure. Absolutely. One or two more questions, sir, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I have a question from Janae Carpenter. She's a colleague and former graduate student. Thanks for the powerful dialogue, Dr. Rashid. Do you agree with Paulo Freire about the pedagogy of the oppressed? If so, how can HBCUs participate in the liberatory process? If so, how can HBCUs participate in the liberatory process?
Well, I think, yes, I'm familiar with the pedagogy of the oppressed.
Yes.
And in fact, I just ran across a partially written paper that I had written years ago about how the work of Paulo Freire and Frantz Fanon needed to be integrated into teacher education programs. So I think that that's one of the things that we can do. You know, those of us that are working directly in teacher education programs begin to use those kinds of books. You know, if I was teaching a history and philosophy of education class, for example, I would use that as a foundational text. And I can remember, you know, even back when I started my career in the 70s down at Jackson State, I was teaching history and philosophy of education, and happened to run into Asa Hilliard at a conference. I think it was a National Black Child Development Institute conference. He asked me what I was teaching. I told him I'm teaching history and philosophy of education. Well, he didn't pull out Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, although we talked about it. Yeah. He pulled out Stolen Legacy. You know, how, you know, Greece stole its philosophy from the ancient Egyptians. And I began to use that on a regular basis. I still use that, you know, for my human development classes. That's one of the first things that my human development students have to read is Stolen Legacy. But I think I might have to go back and infuse some more Paulo Freire into that human development course too, you know. But yeah, I think, you know, there's a place, obviously, and you know, we just have to get more people aware.
Thank you. Dr. Rashid, my last question. It's my question to you, actually, but it's by way of a student. How would you respond, or how do you respond to this question? How do we get the message out to parents about their responsibility to their children?
Well, you know, that's the age-old question, and I think we have to work on multiple fronts.
Yeah, and let me I'm sorry, let me reference the student, because I did everyone else, and I apologize. It's a doctoral student, Ursel Gardner.
Okay. Certainly excellent question, and again, working on multiple fronts. I think through organizations, you know, we're in this whole social media landscape that is relatively new to some of us older folks, and we still don't know how to use it. But you young folks, you know, get the message out in terms of how important it is for our children to learn about their history and culture. I've got another book here that I want to recommend.
Yes, sir.
And many of us know Dr. Kemet Shockley. He's got a book out, African-Centered Education. I think, you know, we you know, let people know that they should be reading these kinds of things. But, you know, we've got a situation where people don't like to read. So we could, but there's a lot of YouTube stuff that we could share with people. Sure. You know, we you know, a lot of history out there on YouTube. So again, working with our organizations, working with our religious institutions, Certainly, if you have young children that are in early childhood centers, daycare centers, Head Start programs, certainly talk to their teachers about a robust program of knowing yourself in terms of African history, African culture. We can't just make Black History Month just February.
That's right. Thank you. Dr. Rashid, we have a few more questions, but I'm going to pause here and then see if, if the students are interested, we can send questions to you. I don't want to keep you past the hour.
Well, I'm fine. Our classes are over, but my Tuesday night class usually ran until about 7 or so. So I'm conditioned to go for a while. So
all right. Well, let me give you one or two more then from Brother Clyde Dowdy, again, a doctoral student and athletic director, VP at the university, Bowie State University. Also a comment: growing up in the 60s, I could not get my parents to chat about their time in the South. I grew up in New York City and found your tabletop talk with your parents extremely interesting and engaging. I have had to pull it out. I've had to pull it out of them, and some things went to their grave with them. So just an editorial, I believe.
Yeah, I talked about that and how powerful it was to have those kinds of conversations with parents and my grandmother, particularly. She had a cousin, that man by the name of Ferdinand Barnett, whose wife was Ida B. Wells Barnett. And so that became part of the family lore. And I can't overemphasize how important that was. And I think that we have an obligation to try to have those kinds of conversations with our own children, our own grandchildren. Sometimes I don't feel like I did that enough for my own children. Even we certainly had our ritual of watching Roots on TV as a family. Right. So I think sometimes that by I thought that by sending them, making sure they went to Howard, they would get all of that. But we can't assume that any institution is going to give them everything that they need. And now there's a new generation. We've got I've got 10 grandchildren now, ranging in age from 1 year, actually he'll be 1 year tomorrow, to 17, who's actually interested in coming to Bowie State. So I may have to talk to you guys. Yeah. We'll have that conversation.
I have one last question from our another esteemed graduate student, Robert Johnson. He has a previous question, but he has this one as well. It's been proven that all students in all demographics improve when an African-American male teacher is present prior to 5th grade. So why is there not more efforts to get African-American males in elementary schools specifically?
Well, the question becomes efforts by who? We certainly can't depend on the system to provide us with more African-American males. I think we see pockets of places where people are trying to recruit, African-American males. We've had programs at Howard. I'm working with a young man out at the University of Washington now who has a program designed to bring more African-American males. I was just speaking down at Clark Atlanta University. They've got a program down there, I think, at one of the colleges. So there are people doing these kinds of things, but the part of the problem is that the teaching profession, it's still a relatively low-paid profession. Mm-hmm. There are many more options now for African-American men and women professionally than there used to be. It used to be a time where one of the few things that we could do was teach, but now we've got many more options open to us. And, the only thing we can do is just try to talk to young people and tell them how important it is to, give teaching a look as a career. But but it's difficult. It's difficult. We still have what we call the preschool to prison pipeline is still going strong. You know, it's supposed to be an urban myth that some places are looking at the third grade reading scores of young Black boys and predicting how many prison beds they're going to need 10 years down the line.
That's right.
But, you know, some urban myths, you know, have a lot of validity to them. And so we, you know, we can do what we can to encourage young Black men to go into education, but that's a tough one.
Yes.
A tough one.
Thank you. Dr. Rashid, thank you so much. It is at the hour, actually, on the nose. And so I appreciate you, your presentation and you fielding all of our questions. Importantly, though, Dr. Rashid, I appreciate you giving back. This is a choice. You have been a mentor of mine for quite some time, and I appreciate you just showing us how it's done and coming back to this platform and to, you know, spill some more of your knowledge yet again with my students, my colleagues as well, and others academic in the community.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure to be here. We certainly could have gone on for a long time talking about the issues that we've talked about, and so maybe at some point you can bring me back for part 2.
You know what? I might hold you to that. You know, we have another class coming up next semester, Race and Racism.
There we go.
Right up your alley, sir. Right up your alley.
Well, I'll certainly be inviting you back to my class next semester.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So great to see everybody.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to also extend a thank you to everyone else here. Thank you to the students who came and showed up, to the colleagues, others in the academic community. I want to give a special shout out to Conference Services and Mrs. Wedderburn and her team. Again, without her and her efforts and her team, we would be doing this through 3-way calls.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you, Ms. Wedderburn, for all of your efforts, and your team for all your efforts behind the scenes. And so we're able to showcase this event. My last thank you is to my son, Nicholas, who is my home technology expert, making sure that I have everything that I need in place, and it fixes me when I need fixing. So without further ado, this is our 5th edition, if you will, our 5th iteration, and we have one more next week, and it will focus on achievement in education. Got a nice surprise for everyone. We'll have some colleagues from Bowie State University. Until then, I will see everyone next time. Those who are in the actual course, per usual, as of late, I will see you again at 6:45.
All right.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.